Hi guys, today we are going to be talking a little bit about the history of West and Central Africa. In particular, we will be focusing on the trading empires. So back in ancient sub-Saharan Africa, in the savannas and in the forests, the people were able to grow a lot of crops, and sometimes they actually had a surplus or an extra amount of crops beyond what they needed to use. And with that, the people could trade the extra crops that they had for things that they did not have. Eventually, these trade routes became so established that they led to the formation of 3 different kingdoms, which you can see pictured in the picture to the right-hand side of the slide. With these trading empires, they began to really start to form in AD 750. These kingdoms in ancient Africa, they were mostly trading with the Arab people who lived in northern Africa. The 2 most hot ticket items, or the items that were most heavily traded, were salt and gold. For us, that might seem a little odd because salt isn't something that's hard to find. You can go to any grocery store and you can pick up table salt, no problem. But for the sub-Saharan Africans, they did not have very much salt, and they used it in many different aspects of their life. However, they did have a lot of gold. So what happened is that in particular, the West Africans began to trade the gold that they had for the salt that they did not have. And this trade became known as the salt trade. Over time, these trade networks allowed for new cities to form all along those different trade routes. Now, when we think of salt, again, we think of table salt that you put into a little shaker and you shake out on your food when you eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner. But these bricks are actually what the salt would have looked like when they were trading it with the Arab people in North Africa. Very different, right? As I said earlier, there were 3 major trading empires in ancient Africa, and the first was the Ghana Empire. The Ghana Empire flourished or was very successful between AD 600 and AD 1200, and it actually became so successful that its population boomed, and eventually that began to strain their resources, and they had a hard time taking care of all of their citizens' needs. And eventually this led to a big power struggle with their people, and that weakened the empire as a whole. And eventually it allowed for the next great empire, the Mali Empire, to kind of come in and defeat them and take over the lands that they had once controlled. So the Mali Empire, they made a big impression in sub-Saharan Africa as well as in North Africa because of their leader. The greatest emperor of the Mali Empire was a guy named Mansa Musa, and he stood out because of his religion. He was actually a practicing Muslim, meaning that he practiced the religion of Islam, and he actually went on his Hajj, or his religious pilgrimage or journey to Mecca, in AD 1324. This trip really helped strengthen the Mali Empire's ties or connections to North Africa, because remember, North Africa was mostly a Muslim area because of the Arab traders that had formed an empire there. Eventually, though, the Mali Empire would also fade, and when they did fade, the third empire would take over, and that was the Songhai Empire. They began to rule in the mid-1400s, and they actually became the largest empire in African history. As they gained more and more control of the area in sub-Saharan Africa and their empire grew bigger and bigger, they took control of several different important trading cities. One of those is Timbuktu. There's a couple different ways to spell Timbuktu, but this is one that you'll see quite often. And Timbuktu is important because it was the center of the salt trade, which, remember, salt and gold were the main items being traded during this time in African history. Even though the Songhai Empire was the largest empire and they were quite powerful, over time they would begin to struggle to control this vast empire that they had created, and eventually in the 1600s, they would begin to split into smaller states and their empire would begin to break apart. So that is just a brief overview of the three important African trading empires: the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire. Thank you guys for sitting down and listening to this little lesson today. Be sure to complete and submit all of the assignments that are related to this, including the notes. You'll submit those through Canvas, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.